Man, what a week we have had, Stuart. It's been a long week. It's been a very exciting week. It's been an eventful week. We've been talking to a lot of people about the Lively versus Baldoni suit, and we got a lot more to say. But it's been interesting.
It's been very exciting. We had the chance to speak with Kjersti Flaa. She's the baby bump entertainment journalist that Blake Lively infamously clapped back at and told her that she liked her bump as well. And then we spoke with the outstanding Zack Peter. And he's an outstanding YouTuber. We really enjoy his stuff, and he always has something good to add to this case. But now that we're at the end of this week, Keith, there's been a lot that's happened in the Blake Lively and the Justin Baldoni lawsuit. I've been your partner for almost 20 years, and I don't know anybody that can slice apart and understand a case and be more accurate in understanding a case than you are. And I think I've seen you in your office, and you're busily going through all of the filings that have been happening in the Blake Lively lawsuit in the Southern District of New York. You're staying on top of all that. But before we get into the amended complaint that was recently filed by Blake Lively that was supposed to help shift the narrative, or in the hope, it was her hope that she would shift the narrative in this case, since there's an overwhelming support for Justin Baldoni and his team. Just what are your overall thoughts on the lawsuit and where we stand today?
Well, it is kind of interesting because I was thinking about, let's take a step back and take stock of what's going on here. And, just from everything that we've seen and read, and I've read the amended complaint, it does seem overall as though Blake Lively did have an ulterior motive here in terms of wanting to take over this movie. And those are the allegations. And of course, we'll talk about how her response to that in the amended complaint. But the end game here appears to be wanting to take over a movie. And I think as between Lively and Baldoni, there definitely was a power imbalance. And I think that you can see that power imbalance being used kind of time and time again, where Blake Lively is the more powerful of the two, and she has the power on her side versus Baldoni, who doesn't appear to have that level of power that Lively and ultimately Ryan Reynolds does during the shooting of the movie. I think it's also important as we go through all of this to keep in context that all of this happened when they were shooting a movie, and it's a movie about love. It's about DV. There's love scenes. There's sex scenes. We're not talking about something that happened in an accounting office, and so I think you have to always keep these things into perspective of where they occurred. It's very different if you have people acting this way, because they're in a lawyer's office or an accounting office, versus if you're two actors in a movie where you have to portray things like love and sex scenes and things like that. And then just kind of keep in mind what's the mindset of each of these parties come August of 2024. Because by August of 2024, when the movie's being released, everybody I think is feeling pretty embattled and entrenched in their positions. And so I could see, if I were to put myself in Baldoni's shoes, I could see where I would feel very embattled by what has occurred if we were to believe his allegations and his side of the story, where you probably do feel like you need to be ready and be on the defensive because you feel like you're being attacked and there's more to come. And on the flip side, for Blake Lively, she got some bad press marketing the movie. And of course, that angers her and Ryan Reynolds. And they naturally want to look for somebody who is responsible for that. And they put the blame on Baldoni and Wayfarer. So just the mindset of the parties heading into this battle, you could kind of see where the battle was inevitable in a lot of ways because of their positions and where they were at.
So this week, obviously, Tuesday was a big day. We had a holiday President's Day on Monday, and so any court filings would not have been due on Monday. They would have been due the following day, Tuesday, the 18th. And we had heard Blake Lively's lawyers stating that they were going to be filing an amended complaint that was going to hopefully reset the narrative in this case, or at least drop some new nuggets or new highlights from Team Lively that was to offset perhaps some of the the PR that's been happening, that's overwhelmingly gone on Justin Baldoni's side. I think many people are sympathetic to him. I've heard one YouTuber call this a David and Goliath moment. We're cheering on, David over Goliath, and that's kind of what's happening here. But Tuesday was supposed to be this big day where this 180-page, 482 paragraph amended complaint by Blake Lively was supposed to be filed, and apparently was filed at 11:59 p.m. 1 minute.
Technically is still Tuesday.
Which technically is still Tuesday. But have you had a chance to go through that amended complaint? And if you have, what are your thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, I have. And I guess if I had to sum up the four major points in the complaint, it's as follows. So if you were to believe Blake Lively, her allegations, I think all of the allegations fall into four broad categories. So number one, her number one allegation is Baldoni and Heath, they're both creeps. All right, that's her allegation. And there's a bunch of things where she says things to that effect. Number two, the SH had nothing to do with her takeover of the movie. So she wants to separate those two issues out because she wants to counteract Baldoni's argument that the only reason that Blake Lively was raising these supposed SH concerns is because she obviously wanted to do a power play and take over the movie. So she's doing the opposite. She's trying to separate those two issues. Number three, we're all dupes. So we're suckers. We all got suckered in. And because of the Astroturfing, which is fake comments apparently on YouTube. I didn't know that before all of this. And number four, the smear campaign. So that's really the crux of her case, is that Baldoni created a smear campaign that he launched apparently sometime in August when the movie was being released. He launched a smear campaign against her. That's what gave the bad press, according to her. And he did it because he knew that she would be filing a SH complaint, which didn't occur until December 20th. But the smear campaign, according to Lively, started in early August. And so that's kind of the overview of the lawsuit. But we can go a little bit deeper now and just kind of talk about, some of the component parts within the amended complaint where we see those things.
Before you go into those component parts, did the strategy from Blake Lively's team to file this amended complaint, which was supposed to change the narrative, it was supposed to let us all know that we've been duped by the team Baldoni, and that their evidence that Lively was going to set all this straight, did it hit its mark from your standpoint, in your opinion?
I think it's a resounding no, based on everything that we've seen on the internet and everybody that we've been talking to and the YouTubers who are following this topic and other news sources that are following the topic. It doesn't appear as though it had the hard-hitting PR turnaround that they probably were hoping for. And let's not forget, this complaint is not just legal. It's more than that. It's in practice primarily PR, because a normal complaint is not 180 pages and 400 and some odd paragraphs. A normal complaint like this might be 20 pages, 30 pages, something like that. So most of this is for public consumption, and it appears as though it didn't quite have the impact that maybe Lively's team was hoping for.
Walk us through some of the more particular issues in the first amended complaint of Blake Lively that you read and hit you, made you feel positive about it, negative, indifferent. Fill us in.
So the first one is just going to the issue of Baldoni's past statements. And so they use a lot of his past statements to try to say that, here's a guy who holds himself out as a feminist and he's supposed to be for women. And obviously what their argument is, and yet he's not. And so they're trying to make him look like a hypocrite. And you'll see that in some of the texts. So, for example, you also see some comments on page 4 of the complaint where there's text between Lively and a friend. And, most of these are unnamed people that she's supposedly texting, where they have a conversation about how Baldoni and Heath are creeps. And so that just goes, again, to trying to paint them as bad people right off the bat. The big and probably most surprising part of this entire amended complaint were the other HR complaints. So they said that there's other people who also made complaints, and there were other women. Now, it's been since reported that people supposedly think that they know who these other people are. Two of the other actresses in in the movie, It Ends With Us. I don't know that that's been confirmed, but the whole concept here of other complaints. So if there were other HR complaints, I think what Team Lively is hoping is that that's going to have an even bigger impact and show that Lively's not the only one. There's other people who are going through this as well. But as of right now, those complaints have not been verified. Sony has confirmed publicly that they did not receive any HR complaints. Whether or not Wayfarer or anybody at the production studio received some complaints, we don't know. And so the other thing that I think struck most people as bizarre is that in the amended complaint, these other people are simply not named. Now, that's not necessarily unusual. You don't have to name every source you have or every witness you have in a complaint. But I think for a PR battle, you do. And so I don't think that that came off really all that well. What were your thoughts about the HR complaint, Stuart? Do you think that they should have named names, or they would have named names if they could have?
The HR complaints are either really good news for Blake Lively, or they're going to be added to the heaping pile of facts that seem to be going against her at this time. The way they would be good news is if they were credible and accurate, and she didn't have her fingerprints on them. Nobody on her team had their fingerprints on these HR complaints. If there truly are women that felt uncomfortable by Justin Baldoni, and again, this is the allegation that's being made, and so far none of this has been proven, then Blake Lively's team has finally gotten their first set of fresh oxygen to reinvigorate where they're going to go with this. But if they have their fingerprints, if Blake Lively's team has their fingerprints on this, and they were involved in getting these complaints produced somehow, some way, because again, it's odd that they weren't given to Sony. It's odd they weren't given to anybody else that we can tell. That's going to hurt Blake Lively, in my opinion. So we have to see. We have to learn more about these HR complaints. And believe me, you've got very good attorneys on both sides. So you're going to have Baldoni's team are going to want to take depositions of these individuals who have filed these HR complaints, and they were going to want to find out what was the genesis of these complaints. Why were these complaints made? Did they speak to anybody about these complaints? And so, this has just opened up a whole new set of questions and further development that needs to be done through discovery and the deposition process. So again, could be a very good fact for Lively, because so far she hasn't had anything really help her out up to this point in time. Or if she's manufacturing these, that could be bad news.
Yeah, that could be really bad news. So the next issue was so Blake Lively made her demands. Wayfarer said it was 17 items. In her complaint, Lively said she had over 30 items. And so they're saying, well, Wayfarer essentially admitted that there was a problem because they responded to her demands and fixed everything she wanted. But if you look on page 6 of the complaint, we actually look at what Wayfarer said. They actually said, although our perspective differs in many aspects, meaning they disagree with what Lively is saying, our perspectives differ, ensuring a safe environment for all is paramount, irrespective of differing viewpoints. Well, that sounds like a very reasonable response to me, and it doesn't really sound like a complete agreement that all of Lively's complaints were valid. What you're saying is, look, we don't agree with you, but we're fine making this a safe environment because that's what we were trying to do all along anyway. So sure, we're gonna adhere to your requests, and a lot of them are probably requests that they thought that they were already doing anyway. So what's the big deal?
And you had suggested at the beginning here that there was this power imbalance at the time between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. And I think what you were getting at was there was times where Lively would say that she wasn't going to come and show up to her job to act because she was upset about X, Y, and Z. And most of that had to do with her not being able to get the dailies, or her not being able to be involved in the production and the editing, or rewriting scenes and things like that. And then there was a point where they needed Lively because of her name and reputation. They wanted her to help market the film. And she had also said, well, if my demands aren't met, I'm not going to market the film. And this is all, again, according to Justin Baldoni and his team. So if that's true, is that the power imbalance you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. And so when you have that type of power imbalance, I mean, number one, it's hard to imagine her. She says that I was an employee of Wayfarer, which maybe legally speaking, maybe she was, but from a power dynamic standpoint, she certainly wasn't, and she seemed to be holding all the cards. She could refuse to come back when she wanted to. So yeah, there was a lot of different power plays here, and she seemed to, play them when she wanted to, and she got what she wanted out of it. I mean, I really can't think of anything that she didn't get that she wanted throughout the entire production, including doing the final edit of the film, which is not what Baldoni wanted. Baldoni didn't ask her to do the final edit of the film, so it must have clearly been what she wanted.
On
Um,
this note about her being more than an actress and coming in and doing more things, when we talked to Kjersti Flaa the other day, she had talked about a old interview from a couple years ago with Forbes,
yeah.
I believe it was. What happened there? What was Blake Lively saying at that time?
That's when she was explaining that she'll be hired to be an actor in a film, but she actually, once she gets in, and she doesn't tell people this up front, but once she gets in, she wants to take over other aspects. So then she does want to be part of the edit and the directing and choosing the wardrobe and all these other things, because that's what makes her feel fulfilled in her project. Well, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be fulfilled with your project, but it probably should be something you disclose up front, maybe, so that everybody understands what your role is going to be as you head into that project. But that would be for, what in my mind would be a good collaboration. And so it was interesting to see her kind of say that on stage and kind of admit to that, because, and the thing that's so funny about, or interesting about it now, is that it seems to be exactly what happened here on this movie. So it's like, oh, okay, that's what you do, and that's what you did.
You had a very very charitable view of that. I was watching Megan Kelly's podcast, and she's fantastic, by the way. But when she came across this video, she said, "This is what we call fraud."
Yeah.
And it's promising to do one thing and then not doing that thing, and really intending to do another thing. So whether it really is fraud or not, that'll be left up to a jury to determine in the future. But do you think that video shows up in opening statements, in closing statements, in any statement that's being made during this trial if it goes forward?
Yeah, there'll be that video, and then there'll be the Saturday Night Live video of Ryan Reynolds making fun of all this. Those will be in opening. They'll be during the trial. They'll be in closing. Yeah, you'll more to come on those. You'll definitely see him in the depositions. And
What
so
about the
Blake Lively.
What about the
Go ahead.
dancing video? So there's another video.
Yeah, exactly. Oh well, the dancing video. Yeah, and we'll get to that. But yeah, that's probably the most damning for sure. And another thing that I want to point out too on page 6 is that. At the moment, so they're alleging, this is paragraph 17, Lively's team is alleging that at the time that she made these complaints about the 17 points or the 30 points, whatever side you want to believe, she did not request nor did she receive any creative rights, editing rights, credits, or other roles on the film. Okay, so what's the relevance of that? So at the time that I complained and I said, I'm not coming back unless you fix these things, I didn't have any creative rights. But a few months later, as the film's wrapping up, you did have all these creative rights. So again, that shows that what she's trying to do is distance her complaints from the takeover of the movie. She does not want those two things to be connected, because otherwise it lends credence to Baldoni's argument. So she's trying to say, I made all these legitimate complaints before I took over the movie. And so given that, you must now believe what I'm saying, right, Stuart? So if that's the sequence of events, I must be more believable. I'm not so sure that you are, but that's the argument that's being put together.
What about this? There's a couple other issues that I noticed as I read the complaint, and one had to do with the marketing plan, which was actually an
Yes.
exhibit to the complaint. What are your thoughts there?
So the marketing plan's so interesting to me, because Lively claims that they had a marketing plan that they all agreed with. And there was, in fact, a marketing document. It's attached as Exhibit C to her complaint. And she says, I was just doing what the marketing plan told me to do. And Baldoni's the one who went off script. So Baldoni starts doing something different. So, okay, well, let's look at what the marketing plan says. So we'll go to Exhibit C. And it says, under what to avoid, it specifically says, focus more on Lily's strength and resilience as opposed to describing the film as a story about DV. Empowerment is not just about standing up to diversity or adversity, but also about having the power to overcome within oneself and grow from it, and developing agency to shape the future. And then it also says, avoid describing the film as a love story or love triangle. It's the story of Lily learning how to take agency of her future. It's a story of hope. Okay, well, let's go back and think about some of the things that Lively did in marketing the film when she's saying, grab your girls, wear your florals. And she's, selling her hair care line and the, alcohol apparently that they have. I'm looking at the marketing plan. I don't see anything in here that says, and make sure to sell alcohol or, make sure to sell your hair care products. I'm not seeing it. And so, okay, you didn't really stick to the marketing plan, did you? And that could be fine. I mean, it could be that, okay, maybe the way you market it how you're going to market it. But don't be surprised when you start getting negative press on the way that you're marketing it. And don't be surprised that maybe you should have stuck to the script a little bit more. And the marketing plan, I think it was pretty solid. I mean, I think it was a good idea to focus on hope and Lily's ability to overcome adversity. That sounds like a good plan, but it doesn't sound like one that they stuck to. So it's another example in my mind of the allegations in the complaint saying one thing, but then when you look under the surface and you look at the evidence, here's the marketing plan, and then here's what she did for marketing. And you're like, okay, these allegations don't add up. I mean, it's not making sense.
And wasn't there other times before this movie even where Blake Lively was marketing, for example, her husband's gin brand? I think it's called Aviation Gin. This is Ryan Reynolds. Was there a time where she was marketing this and maybe even in kind of an aggressive way?
Yeah, I mean, look at Kjersti Flaa's video with Magnus, her boyfriend Magnus. I mean, he had to go into an interview with Blake Lively, and she took most of the interview, like 80% of the time, to try and force him to drink gin at 10 in the morning. And she was describing how sexy the gin was. It's actually hard to watch. I watched it and it was very cringy. But, that's not, if that's what you're doing to market, I guess some fun-loving movie, okay, that's still not really an appropriate way to do it with a reporter, but okay. But if that's the way you're marketing a movie about DV, I think you've got some problems on your hands. And I think they're problems of your own making if that's what happened.
So that was Magnus Sunholm, and it's ironic that he's doing Blake Lively's interview in, say, 2018, and he's almost forced to drink this gin at 9 a.m. in the morning, and basically the interview was hijacked by Blake Lively. You can see it online. What hit me about this was that Kjersti Flaa, who we had on our show, she was the infamous baby bump journalist, where she had complimented Blake Lively on her baby bump, and that interview went pretty far south. And I think the second question had to do something with clothes, and so Blake Lively jumped on her for the clothes question. But then 2 years later, here Blake Lively is almost force feeding alcohol to Magnus, who happens to be Kjersti Flaa's boyfriend. I just thought that was ironic.
Yeah. What are the chances that those two come together? So let's talk a little bit about how they try to attack Sarowitz. So they really
before you get into that.
Okay.
So one of our favorite movies is The Princess Bride, and in there's some very witty advice in there, and one of those is to never start a land war in Asia, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we kind of have one here, and that is never sue a billionaire if you don't have to.
Right.
And how does that apply to Steve Sarowitz? Walk us through what's going on there.
Yeah, it wasn't a good move. And it could be that Sarowitz would have come into the case to defend Wayfarer, even if he hadn't been individually named, but you named him individually as well. Okay, well, you just poked a bear, didn't you? And so I'm not sure that that was the best idea. But what they say is that at some point in time, around August of 2024, apparently, this is on page 10 of the complaint, that he told people that he was prepared to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Miss Lively and her family. I think and this again is a statement that somebody overheard, and he was going to defend this is the good part. I will protect the studio like Israel protected itself from Hamas. There were 39,000 dead bodies. There will be 2 dead bodies when I'm done, minimum. Not dead, but you're dead to me. So,
that's strong language. Very strong language.
Strong language, yes. But, you're talking about somebody who's obviously highly upset and angry about what's happening and the way that he's being treated and the way his people are being treated. And so, put yourself in his shoes and what they've been through on the Wayfarer side. you're going to say stuff like that. And I could see where somebody would say something like that. Now, I guess the question is this going to hurt Sorowitz in the eyes of the judge? So what do you think about that, Stuart?
It's really strong language. It's probably a poor analogy. I think that this happened at a very emotional time. Nobody likes to be named in a lawsuit. It's one of the hardest days of your life. You have hard days when family members pass away. You have hard days if your family falls apart. You have hard days when your children disappoint you, gravely disappoint you. Those are very tough days to get through. One of the other tough days in life is being sued, and it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire, a millionaire, a thousandaire. It's a sucky feeling. It's just awful. And so when you get sued, you tend to get angry. And survival of the fittest, we start thinking, how do we protect ourselves? And so having some strong language here in response to that, I can't blame anybody for that. Nobody enjoys getting sued, and so that's what I would chalk this up to. But again, I think it was a little bit of an error, maybe a big error on the part of Lively's team to name him individually. They could have still gotten after what they were getting at by just naming Wayfair. And again, like you said, maybe he still steps forward, but you haven't poked the bear necessarily. You haven't come after somebody specifically, especially somebody that has money that they can burn on a case like this. So
well, they made it personal, right? They made it
they
personal.
did. They made it very personal. Yeah. So
And
that
I would point out too that whoever claim that Sorowitz said that they're yet another unnamed person in the amended complaint.
So, and that's one thing I'm seeing, that Baldoni's team has done a very good job of actually backing up everything that they've done in this case with documentary evidence. They have text messages, they have emails, they have letters, they have writings, they have documents. And you and I, as lawyers, we love documents because documents don't lie. Witnesses lie, witnesses misremember, witnesses don't always see things the way that they should, but documents are somebody can try to misinterpret the documents, but juries are pretty good at determining what a letter says, what an email says, what a text thread says. And so it seems like Baldoni's team has done a very good job of doing that. And I think that that's absent, at least from what I'm seeing from this amended complaint by Blake Lively. There's a lot of accusations that are being made, which is, by the way, all she's required to do in a complaint is to make accusations. But it seems to me, since this is a PR war that's going on here, that you'd want to include text messages. If you were Blake Lively, you'd want to say, oh, well, Justin Baldoni, he told you those things, but what he didn't tell you is there's these text messages, there's these emails, there's these letters. And that just seems to be missing from this amended complaint. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I mean, some unnamed source is coming in here and saying, hey, I heard a billionaire say something crazy. Okay. I mean, I thought that's what billionaires did. I thought they all say crazy stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we all say crazy things at times, especially when you're under stress and you feel like you're being attacked. And so, we'll see. I mean, ultimately, this unnamed source will have to be named and deposed, and we'll find out what the truth of the matter is. But I don't think it's doing her any favors. I do think it's funny, though, moving on to these, there's a footnote on page 11 that talks about these altered texts. And so they included this footnote to explain that they didn't alter any texts according to what they're saying, because their texts were not accurate. And you could see that based on what Baldoni put in his complaint. And so they're saying that, oh, these texts, these are how we received them when we served a civil subpoena, which I'm not entirely clear where they served a civil subpoena, what lawsuit or case they served the civil subpoena on, but they claim they served a civil subpoena on Jones Work LLC, and that's the way that the texts were produced to them. And so they were produced without emojis, or apparently they were produced with things missing. I don't know. That's their explanation for why the texts appear to be altered when their argument is there's nothing altered. So I thought that was an interesting footnote where they try to kind of explain away a problem with their first complaint that wasn't in now in the amended complaint.
As lawyers, Keith, we tend to terms are important. You have to understand terms, and then you make an argument. If you don't understand the terms, your argument is usually not sound. So, a lot of the times when we're lawyers, we want to understand the definitions of words, and we have a new word that has come up to us, and this is at least new to us. It may have been out there for a long time. You and I are kind of dense when it comes to this pop culture stuff, but there's a term called astroturfing. What is astroturfing, and why is it being raised in Blake Lively's complaint?
Well, now I know. So, astroturfing is the practice of publishing opinions or comments on the internet, in the media, etc., that appear to come from ordinary members of the public, but actually come from a particular company or political group. So, they're fake comments, is what it comes down to. And so, okay, that's what they're saying, and that's the dupe part. So that's where we've all been suckered in, because all the comments on all the videos and all the social media are all fake, and the reason they're fake is because they're all saying that Blake Lively got negative press for the way that she marketed this movie. And naturally, from Team Lively's point of view, she wouldn't have gotten bad press, except if there was a smear campaign with a bunch of fake comments smearing her or creating this. So, in other words, from their point of view, she on her own would not create bad press. I'm not so sure about that. I think that there's some pretty good indications that she did, in fact, create bad press all on her own. And that brings us to the next part of the complaint, too, is on page 16. They show these text messages between Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel. So Melissa Nathan is the crisis PR person that was brought in by Team Baldoni. And Jennifer Abel was the PR lady. And so you have Jennifer Abel as the PR person. Melissa Nathan is the crisis PR person who came in, actually helped out or worked for Johnny Depp as well. And in their series of text messages, they're saying that the socials are really ramping up in Baldoni's favor. And they're saying that she must be furious, she referring to Lively. And then they're saying it's actually sad because it just shows you have people really want to hate on women. But I think that what they're saying here is that the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, is what Melissa Nathan says. So in other words, everything is going against Lively, and according to Nathan and Abel, they haven't done anything yet. They're just monitoring. And so and we see this in the exhibits to Baldoni's complaint, that they were planning on taking a defensive position. They were going to be in defense and try to make sure that that they reacted if they needed to, but they were not going to be on an offensive position. And so it's just interesting that in Lively's complaint, they literally are putting text messages saying, oh, they're noticing that everything's going against Lively. Okay, but that doesn't mean it's Baldoni's fault. That doesn't mean it's Baldoni's doing. That doesn't mean that he created a smear campaign to skew everything against Lively. Just because they're noticing it doesn't mean that that's what's happening. So I thought that was kind of an interesting part of the amended complaint as well.
Yeah, and obviously, Lively's lawyers are doing the best they can. And by the way, this is Manat, Phelps, and Phillips. It's a tough one to remember. They're a very big firm. They've been around for years. They're very bright attorneys that are there, and I think they're doing the best they can under the circumstances. But right now, the PR campaign and even the legal campaign is not doing well for Blake Lively. Lively has demanded that Wayfair at some point issue some statements in this case. What does that tell you?
So I want to move on to the dancing scene, and it's really interesting how they changed the allegations in the amended complaint for the dancing scene. And it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but let me just talk about what happened in this dancing scene and how they changed it. Because if you recall, in the original complaint, what they said was Baldoni did all sorts of inappropriate touching and ran his lips down Miss Lively's neck and these things. And then Baldoni released the video, and it was a video and audio of them dancing. And that was probably some of the most devastating evidence that we've seen to date that shows just how wrong Lively's claims were or allegations were. And so in the amended complaint on page 27 and 28, so this is paragraph 82, they try to recast it. So now they're going to try and recast these allegations And what they're going to say is that, well, yes, the dancing scene happened, but Mr. Baldoni was out of character and he wasn't really acting the way he should be acting. And he was touching Miss Lively in inappropriate ways. And the thing that was so interesting is where they say the video footage of the scene shows Miss Lively to be trapped, having to appear as though her character was happy and in love while the cameras were rolling. So it's just a little funny to me to think that an actor is going to complain that they have to appear happy and in love while the cameras are rolling. Well, that's all acting. That's just acting. That's again, and that's where it's so important to remember the context in which this is happening. So if this was in an accounting office and some accountant came up to a secretary and started dancing around and, pretending to kiss her, that'd be wrong. That'd be completely wrong. But if you're in a movie where that's the scene that you're shooting and you're supposed to be showing that you're in love, it's completely a different situation and more obviously appropriate. But the interesting thing in my mind is that you go back and watch the video of them dancing, and I fail to see where she's pulling away. They're saying, well, Miss Lively was trying to pull away. She wanted to get out of the situation. I just didn't see that. I didn't see that happening. And that's going to be a problem as she goes forward because it's going to affect her credibility. And once you go down that road and you don't have that credibility, you're going to be in big trouble because you're not going to be able to rehab yourself, especially in front of the jury.
Yeah, I've said this all week, and that is that trials are about the truth. And the truth is given to the jury, mostly through the lawyers in the case. And it's also given through the parties and the witnesses that show up to testify and the documents, of course, as evidence. You as a lawyer you can't bluff a jury. You can't hoodwink a jury. They're the smartest people in the room, and they come from varied backgrounds. And collectively, whether it's a 9-panel or 10 or 11 or 12-panel jury, collectively, these people are smarter than any one lawyer in the room, any one person in the room. And they really hold it against people who try to trick them, who don't always give them all the information, who aren't truthful with them. And so that's why these trials are about credibility. And if you can show that Blake Lively is not credible based upon her past statements, and of course, in light of the evidence that is there, this dancing scene, which now has audio, which apparently she wasn't aware of when she made her first complaint in this case, and she's made some changes in the amended complaint because the audio subsequently came out. If you can get a jury to not believe her on just a single point of her testimony, there is a very powerful jury instruction that will be read to the jury in this case. And that jury instruction says, if you find as the jury that a person has lied to you in this case on any point at all, you are allowed to discount their entire testimony. And so I think that if I was the lawyers representing Baldoni, I would be trying to set this strategy in place. And that would start with a very soon deposition, a videotape deposition of Blake Lively. And that will be happening fairly soon here. And that's why I have said, and I think you've joined me in this, and that is Blake Lively and her team, they need to figure out how to resolve this case. She cannot sit for her deposition. If she does, it'll be brutal. And I'm afraid that she's going to have so many misstatements that are going to be used against her, perhaps even lies used against her. That is going to be devastating to her case.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, she cannot sit for a videotape deposition. It's not going to be good. And no matter how much somebody thinks that they're going to do fare well at a deposition, they're not. And they have to sit down and match wits with another attorney, in this case, Friedman, and he's going to be bringing all this up. And that's one of the downsides of having such a long complaint is it gives the deposing attorney tons of ammunition to go through and just to slice and dice the witness. And it's not going to be good for her, in my opinion. I do think it's interesting that she put in the allegations again at page 37 about how Mr. Baldoni inappropriately asked Lively's trainer about her weight. We've heard from him that the reason he asked about the weight is because he had a scene where he was going to pick her up and he has back issues. So to me, that kind of makes some sense. But she got very livid about it. And we all know that Ryan Reynolds got mad about it and demanded that the scene be removed from the movie, which ultimately it was. And then apparently Miss Lively was under the weather, and Mr. Baldoni offered to connect her with an expert that he uses with probiotics. And then Miss Lively said she found out that this expert on probiotics was actually a weight loss specialist. Well, and so there again, she's making the assumption that Baldoni tried to refer her to a weight loss specialist because apparently he had a problem with her body. Look, somebody can be both a weight loss specialist and a specialist on probiotics. In fact, it kind of makes sense that the two would go hand in hand, because you would think a nutritionist probably does know a little something about probiotics. So it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to be either an expert on probiotics or an expert on weight loss. You could be both. But obviously, she did not take that well, and that now comes to us. So I like the fact that it all came. It doesn't really hold much water, I guess. That's the thing. And so what that he asked about her weight? If it applies to a scene, I think that's fine. And so what that he gave her the name of the person who has a specialist in probiotics. That's what she has a specialist in. If she's also a weight loss specialist, I can't help that.
So Keith, in these types of cases,
So
in these SH type cases, whenever an allegation, whether it's credible or not, is made to an HR department in a large company or even a mid-sized company, that HR company will generally hire an independent lawyer that's protected by work product, but that independent lawyer will do an investigation, interview the individuals that may know something about the claim, and come to a determination, and let the powers that be at that company know whether, in fact, this independent lawyer believes SH took place or whether it didn't. And that generally happens, contemporaneously with the SH complaints to HR. But here, there's a little bit of a wrinkle, and there was a little bit of it may be a misstep, in my opinion, from Baldoni's team, but maybe I just don't understand the strategy. But can you walk us through that?
yeah, if you look on page 44 of the complaint, and this might have been a little bit of a misstep for Baldoni, but on January 31, 2025, his team hires counsel lawyers to do an investigation. So they're going to do an SH investigation, which is not uncommon. But the problem with it is, as Lively's counsel points out, is that it's too little too late. And so when you're supposed to do an investigation, it should be promptly, it should be thorough. And how are you going to do a thorough investigation now that everybody's in litigation and nobody wants to talk to you? And it certainly wasn't timely. 2025 or January 2025 is, almost 2 years later, after May of 2023. So I don't know why they were doing that on the Baldoni side. I guess they were trying to show that, we're doing what we're supposed to do with an HR complaint. And maybe they're thinking that they're doing an investigation based on the CRD complaint in January 20th. Now, that's a different story. So if Baldoni's team were to say, we received your CRD complaint that was filed January 20th, and in response to that, we're doing an investigation that starts in January of 2025, well, that makes sense. I mean, that is a timely investigation. The way that Lively's counsel kind of viewed it is, this is an investigation for the claims that came up back in May of 2023. Nope, I'm sorry, too little, too late. So, maybe it was a misstep, maybe it wasn't, but it was an interesting fact that we didn't know about until the amended complaint. So let's talk about what the core of their argument is. If you want to go, if you went to page 52, paragraph 161, here's really the crux of their argument. And it's one small paragraph. And it says, the story of the edit of the film, okay, remember when she took over and edited the film, the story of the edit of the film is not relevant to Miss Lively's claims of SH and retaliation. It is a red herring designed to distract the public away from the grave misconduct by the defendants. So this is exactly what we were saying right from the beginning, which is she wants to separate out her takeover of the movie from the SH claims. And it makes sense. I could see why she wants to do it. I don't think it's necessarily going to stick, but that's what she's trying to do with that argument. And paragraph 161 nails it. That's exactly a nice summation of exactly what she's trying to do here.
Is there any other quick issues you want to hit on the complaint, Keith, before we move on to another subject?
Yeah, the one last thing is the 2017 TED Talk by Baldoni. So they make a big deal about this. And they go back and they try to show once again that Baldoni is a hypocrite. They're trying to say, here's a man who claims to be a feminist, and then he, is involved in SH on this movie production, so he's a hypocrite. But they then, in the same portion of the amended complaint, they complain about the fact that people are taking a 10-year-old interview out of context, which of course is the interview by Kjersti Flaa about the little bump. And so it's funny that she doesn't like the old interviews, but she doesn't mind using the old interviews. And this comes back to a point that I've never really liked this tactic, but I've seen it used in petitions and complaints where an opposing attorney will take something that somebody said, like in a blog or something or an article many years ago, and they'll try to use it against them. And it's rarely effective. It just isn't that effective. Because everybody, we're not idiots. We understand that you can say something in an article 10 years ago. It doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening now is particularly relevant. Although I went and listened to his TED Talk and I thought it was fine. I mean, it seemed like a perfectly nice talk to me. Maybe it was a little touchy feely for some people or for some men. That could be understandable. Certainly probably was for Ryan Reynolds, but it didn't seem like the type of thing that you would bring into a lawsuit because who cares? I mean, he did a presentation and he said that, he said what he said in that presentation. You can go and see it for yourself. I mean, I thought it was perfectly fine.
So in the end, to sum up all of this, the first amended complaint, Blake Lively, did it hit its mark in your opinion, or is it lacking in some degree?
I think they did. I'm sure that they did the best that they could. I guess I don't know for certain because I don't know what evidence they actually have. But I think that they did the best with what they have. I think it missed the mark certainly in the PR side. So when it comes to the court of public opinion, I think they missed the mark. In terms of legally, I mean, it is what it is, and we'll have to move on to the next step. And that's an important point too, is that you've got the complaint. The end of mark of all of this is trial, which tentatively is set for March of next year, although trial dates get continued all the time. And the question is, what happens between now and trial? What are the next steps for a case like this? And the immediate next step is discovery. So people are going to start asking for documents, serving subpoenas, taking depositions. Each side has a fair opportunity to go and find their evidence that they want to use at the trial. And so that process is going to go on for a long time. The discovery typically can take a year, 2 years. It's a long process. And then you'll have all sorts of motions along the way, like motions for summary judgment. We have motions to dismiss, we'll talk about in a second. All of these things happen before trial. And at some point, there's, could be a mediation or some sort of settlement conference. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be done between the complaint and trial. This complaint is just the starting point. It's not the be-all and end-all of the case.
All right, very good analysis of that complaint. Thank you for taking the time to go through it as closely as you did. And of course, we'll look to see how this case develops. And in fact, there is a recently new development, and that is Leslie Sloan and her PR company. They have filed a motion, a 12B6 motion in the federal court. A 12B6 motion is much like a demur in state court, and the 12B6 motion is a request to dismiss Baldoni's complaint because Leslie Sloan and her PR company are saying that the complaint does not state a claim that would justify relief, and so they're challenging the sufficiency of Justin Baldoni's complaint. And just a little bit of background here: at the demur stage or the 12B6 motion stage in federal court, the court must consider Justin Baldoni's complaint and its contents as being true. Everything that he's alleged in there, they just assume it to be true at this stage of the litigation. It doesn't mean it is true, but at this stage of the litigation, they must assume it's true. And the court must also bend over backwards and find in Justin Baldoni's favor if it can. So in other words, courts want matters to go to trial to be determined. They don't want to have these 12B6 motions to essentially end the complaint by having the complaint dismissed without some determination, especially if some valid claims are made. So my question, Keith, have you reviewed the 12B6 motion, and what are Leslie Sloan's and her PR company's arguments?
So yes, I have, and yeah, a motion to dismiss under 12b6 in state court. We call it a demur, like you said. It's really just a very technical argument, and it's not what people think it is. A lot of times, people think, "Oh, somebody's going to come in and show their evidence." There's no evidence. It's purely arguing off of what's pleaded in the filing papers in the complaint. And so, basically, what her arguments are, Leslie Sloan, is that first of all, she can't be sued for defamation because her statements are opinions. And that's certainly true. If you're expressing an opinion, that is not defamatory. So there's a big difference between me saying something that asserting it as fact, like, I could say that somebody is having an affair, a married person is having an affair as if it's a fact. That could be defamatory. But if I looked at somebody and said, that looks like a person who'd have affairs, that's just my opinion. That's not defamatory, or it arguably is not. I mean, you could argue that, but I think that there's a difference there. So she's trying to say, well, my statements were all opinions. They weren't facts. And so therefore you can't sue me for defamation. And number two, my statements were substantially true. The problem with those two arguments is ultimately it's going to be up to the trier of fact is going to have to decide if what she said were opinions and if what she said was true or not true. That's all for the trier of fact. That's all for the jury. So typically those types of arguments aren't going to win when you have a motion to dismiss at this early stage of the litigation. She also claims that Baldoni failed to allege sufficient facts for civil extortion, for actual malice, which is what's needed when you sue a public figure for defamation.
Can you just
For
pause there?
special,
Can you just pause there for a second, Keith? I want you not to forget where you were at there. You were at the actual malice, but why is there a distinction between this type of claim being made against a private person versus a public person? And is Leslie Sloan a public person, in your opinion?
So the difference, Leslie Sloan may or may not be a private person, but Baldoni is definitely a public person. And the difference is, under our freedom of speech, the more public you are, the more you put yourself out in the public eye, the more you have to suffer people saying things about you, and you can't sue about it. And so a private person has more protection from defamation than a movie star does, or an actor does, or anybody, in the public eye, because there's going to be a public discourse about you if you're in the public eye, and you just have to deal with it. That's the price of fame. That's the price of being out in the public. And so in order to prove defamation when you're a public figure, so Baldoni is saying he was defamed, he has to prove that the statements were not just false, but that they were made in actual malice. And so that's just a different standard for public individuals that's not available for private individuals. And so essentially
So then Leslie Sloan and her PR company have come in and they've said that, you failed to properly allege certain claims. One was the claim for civil extortion. They're saying there's not enough facts, or there's not claims that are sufficiently made there. And that also this actual malice issue was not pleaded properly enough. Are there any other claims that they are saying were not alleged properly?
just false light. False light's just an offshoot of defamation.
So we deal with demurs a lot, Keith, and we're not in federal court that often, but we have been. How likely do you think this 12b6 motion is to succeed?
It's not that likely to succeed. What happens in most of these is the court might grant part of it but deny another part of it. So maybe some of it's pleaded properly and some of it isn't. And then, to the extent that the court does grant the motion or part of the motion, then Baldoni's side will have an opportunity to amend their complaint and fix it. So the courts are supposed to give leave to amend very liberally. So Baldoni will have another crack at it. He'll have another chance to come back and restate his allegations to try and fix it if the court agrees with Leslie Sloan.
Okay, so I think that covers the 12b6 motion. Obviously, that'll be interesting to watch. There is I'm sure, a responsive filing that we're going to get from Team Baldoni, and when that comes in, then we'll cover that as well. There is one final issue today, and that has to do with protective orders. And in this case, there is an offering for a protective order regarding something. Can you fill us in on that?
So yeah, what happened is, as we all know, Lively wants 2.5 years of text messages and other communications from Baldoni and the Baldoni parties. And so what the judge told the parties to do is they need to meet and confer and figure out what they want to do on a protective order. A protective order is a common order that the court issues. It happens in a fair number of cases, not every case, but a lot of them, where the parties agree that certain information that's produced in discovery is going to remain confidential. And they don't just agree to it, but the court actually orders it. And there's consequences to that if you don't follow that order. And so what happened on the protective order is the Lively side submitted their idea of what that order should look like. So it's a proposed order. It's not the actual order. We'll see what the judge ultimately does with it when the judge comes out and decides what to do. But it is a proposed order by the Lively parties of what the protection should look like.
And if the protective order, under some terms, is granted, and it'll essentially say, hey, text messages that are produced will be marked confidential, and everyone agrees to treat these documents specially now and mark them as confidential documents, and only certain people are allowed to view these documents. Based upon the proposed order that you're seeing, is there a potential hole? Is there a potential area where abuse could happen, where things may be disclosed when the whole idea behind a protective order is to keep these things from being disclosed?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with this particular case. So there's two different categories of documents. So the parties are allowed to designate documents as either being confidential or attorney eyes only. And so those are the two categories that you can stamp on the documents as you're producing them if you want to, in order to keep them confidential. But the problem is there's a list of people who still have the right to look at these things. So, of course, the list of people include things like the parties can look at it, the attorneys, mediators or arbitrators, witnesses, people retained by the parties as experts. So everybody, even though it's confidential, all those people can still look at these documents. And then if it's attorney's eyes only, the parties can't look at them, but all these other people I just mentioned still can, including outside vendors, which outside vendors is defined as such as copy service providers and document management consultants, graphic production services, or other litigation support services. Well, think about that for just a minute. If you're going to give some of these documents to an outside vendor who's a copy service provider, for example, and obviously there's, I mean, not to cast aspersions to anybody, but still, if you're working at a copy service and you come across some very juicy documents that you could sell to TMZ for a lot of money, like who wouldn't do that? I mean, it seems like there's a huge hole in this protective order when it comes to the outside vendors. So I don't know that I would want to agree to that off the cuff. I mean, there might be times when you're going to have to send something to an outside vendor, but it just seems like a huge hole to the entire protective order. And it would be, if this was just your ordinary case that didn't involve celebrities, that might be fine. There might be nothing wrong with that. But this information, it's going to be so valuable, especially if it's something juicy. I don't think I would want to agree up front that it's going to be available to that many people if I were in the shoes of Team Baldoni.
Well, and it will be interested to see what the judge does with this request for 2.5 years of Justin Baldoni's text messages. The scope of discovery is broad. It is to be liberal. It is anything that may lead to the introduction of evidence at the time of trial. So it's a very broad standard. There are privacy rights that have to be considered, and generally we see privacy rights with tax returns and financial accounts and those types of things. Text messages can also be very private, and one can imagine that there may be some text messages in this case that might be the first response of somebody, Justin Baldoni or somebody else, when they found out they got sued in this case. And they might, they might have said things that were unkind. And I'm assuming that's what Blake Lively's team is going for, because they need anything they can get their hands on, from my perspective. So today, Keith, we've gone on your overall thoughts of the lawsuit. Again, thank you for your breakdown. Again, there's nobody better in the business than you breaking this stuff down. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it, in addition to being the managing partner of our firm and keeping us all headed in the right direction. You went over the amended complaint in detail, and I learned many things there, and I'm sure many people in the audience learned some things there. And we briefly discussed the 12B6 motion. We'll follow up on that when Justin Baldoni's team responds to it. That'll be Brian Friedman and his group. And then we talked about the protective order, and of course, we just need to see what happens with that. With all those things being said, you have inundated yourself with all the facts of this case. Ryan Reynolds picks up the phone over the weekend and he calls Keith A. Davidson. By the way, you are different than Keith M. Davidson. I just want to make that very clear. There are two Keith Davidsons in the State Bar of California. You're the best Keith Davidson I know, so I'm going to say you're the best one. If Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively were to call you over the weekend and say, hey, I heard you commenting on this case, and you're kind of making it sound like we don't have much to go on here, and maybe we're not winning the PR battle, and maybe we're not even going to win the legal battle. What would be your advice to these two individuals on how to address this matter?
Well, I would say let's start a dialogue. So we need to reach out to somebody on the Baldoni side, whoever is kind of leading the pack over there, and at least start some back channel discussions about, what are they thinking? Where can we go from here? And a lot of these cases, almost all legal cases, ultimately they'll go to a mediation where you sit down with a retired judge and you try to broker a deal. And that's probably the best way to try to get something resolved in a case like this. But it won't be easy. And I also would warn them that if they do want to settle this and they want to settle it quickly, there's probably going to have to be a payment of money, and there's probably going to have to be some other things done in order to make sure that everybody feels comfortable that you're both just walking away without claiming that your statements were true. And that could be a hard pill to swallow. In fact, in some ways, that might be a harder pill to swallow than paying money. So you'd have to kind of think about what are the parameters that you would be willing to agree to. But it's not going to be easy to settle it. But there certainly are some terms out there somewhere, some way where you could bring this together and find a meeting ground where you could get this case settled. Nobody would be happy with it. Both sides would walk away probably not happy with the settlement, but at least it would get you out of this mess. And if I were representing Lively and Ryan Reynolds, I would want to get Blake Lively out of this mess before she sits for a video deposition. That's for sure.
And same thing. Let's say you're sitting home eating popcorn on Saturday night, and you get a call from Brian Friedman, or you get a call from Justin Baldoni, and they say, hey, Mr. Davidson, I really appreciate all of your analysis on this. We got a call. We got a call from a lawyer, and they want to start dialogue with us on behalf of Blake Lively to see if we can resolve this case. Should we attempt to resolve this case? Or we've got all the PR on our side for the most part right now. We've got all the leverage. Shouldn't we take this in front of a jury and have the jury determine this in my favor? After all, I've been called a sexual predator. I've been put in a very bad light. I've been harmed by reputation standards. So should I start dialoguing on settlement, or should we just keep pressing forward to try this matter?
It never hurts to talk. And when you and I were younger attorneys, sometimes we would like to pound our chests. And when people called to try to talk about a mediation or settlement, we wanted to act tough and say absolutely not. But then as you get older and you get wiser and you learn the ways of the world, you realize that there's no harm in talking. And so if you want to talk to me about it, I'm more than happy to talk about it. And we'll see what comes of it. If the other side wants to underestimate, us as lawyers because we're willing to talk about it, well, you're going to do that at your own peril. And so that's what you learn as you get more seasoned as a lawyer. So it never hurts to talk. Let's see what they have to say. We'll see where we can take this, see if it's anything that's worth pursuing. And if not, that's fine. We'll just keep going with the lawsuit. We haven't lost anything. And if we're able to get somewhere, well, that's good too. So it never hurts to talk. Whether or not they would actually, would be willing to talk, I don't know. They should always be willing to talk at least and discuss it. It looks like, it's not going to settle anytime soon, but you never know. I mean, surprising things happen in lawsuits all the time. So I did want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen if somebody violates this protective order. And it does say that the protective order violation could subject people to punishment of contempt of court. I also noticed that anybody who is given these documents, any of these outside parties or whoever, they all have to sign non-disclosure agreements. So I thought that was another interesting aspect of the protective order. We'll see what happens when Baldoni files his version of the protective order. Each side will have an opportunity to say what they think the protective order should be, and then we'll kind of see where it goes from there. It should be kind of interesting. But I think that is really our deep dive for today, and I think we've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more stuff going on next week.
Well, Keith, again, thank you. This was fun. I am enjoying this. I know there's people's lives that are at stake here, and there's true detriments that are going to be coming towards people, and there'll be some victories too that'll happen to some people in this case. But these are real people's lives. It's very painful, very stressful. I appreciate all the time you did. I want to appreciate all the people that have joined us on our live today. The people are really resonating with what we're talking about, our viewpoint from a legal standpoint on this case. I want to thank all the people that are taking the time to comment, and we read them all. We enjoy your comments, even the ones that tell us that we're wrong and we shouldn't suggest settling and those kinds of things. We're happy to read those as well. And we're going to keep doing this. We're here every Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific to talk about current events. We happen to also be lawyers in California that litigate in the estate and probate matter, but we enjoy talking about things that are going on. We recently did a blog on all of the air crashes that are going on. I think that's coming up in a day or two. So we're going to keep talking about current events. And for those who are enjoying this, please continue to join us if you're willing to. We always like to have people subscribe. It gives us a little bit of notoriety. And then we're also going to be reaching out to people that are experts in this field that can help us better understand this case. So with that, Keith, you have any other closing comments you want to make?
No, I really appreciate everybody joining us. And yeah, we've had some great collaborations recently, and we want to keep that going as well. And we'll have a video coming out in the next couple of days talking about all the recent air disasters. And so I think that'll be interesting for everybody to hear. And we are interviewing somebody for that video. So it's going to be really good, I think. And thank you for all your help, Stuart, for helping me prepare for all of this, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of things to go through. We do have day jobs. And so we really enjoy, sitting here and going through this and breaking it down for everybody.
All right. We'll see you all next week.